Shedeur Sanders' oblique injury is an ugly piece of timing for a rookie who desperately needed a string of live reps to convert one impressive preseason outing into real momentum. He flashed in week 1, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers, poise, and some plays that legitimately looked NFL ready. And suddenly the narrative around Cleveland's crowded quarterback room shifted from speculation to possibility. Now, with an oblique strain keeping him out of joint practice work and making him unlikely for this weekend's preseason game in Philadelphia, that momentum stalls at exactly the worst possible moment. From a purely football evaluation standpoint, missed preseason reps are more than just numbers on a schedule. For a fifth-round rookie who started camp 4th on the depth chart, every practice rep against higher-level competition and every live game sequence were currency, tape that coaches, coordinators, and the front office could use to justify moving him up the chart or to justify keeping an extra quarterback on the 53. Sanders' first game performance bought him a window, but that window is narrow. The Browns now have 2 fewer preseason games to sort the pecking order, and opposing joint practices, especially against the Super Bowl champs, were a golden chance to see him against top-tier looks. Losing those reps reduces his ability to make the trust me case to a staff that's inclined to prefer veteran stability. Medically, oblique strains are frustratingly variable. They can be a minor tweak that heals in a few days, or they can linger for several weeks if the muscle is torn or if mechanics are altered and compensation causes setbacks. For quarterbacks, the real dangers are recurrence and losing throwing rhythm. Rushing back risks both. From a team management perspective, the smart play is conservative. Rest, imaging as needed, progressive throwing program, and reevaluation before reintroducing contact or live reps. For Cleveland, that means balancing the desire to showcase a hyped rookie with the long-term goal of protecting him as an investment. Strategically, this changes several things for the Browns. First, it slows any urgency to reorder the depth chart. Joe Flacco is the experienced veteran. Kenny Pickett, if healthy, and Dillon Gabriel are both in the mix, and the coaching staff will naturally default toward known quantities when a rookie's sample size is reduced by injury. Second, it complicates roster math. Most teams carry 3 quarterbacks on game day. Keeping 4 is a luxury that costs a roster spot and forces harder decisions elsewhere. Sanders needed sustained tape to argue that Cleveland should pare down elsewhere and retain him as QB2 or even keep 4. Now, that argument is harder to make. Third, it gives other young guys a chance to reassert themselves. If Gabriel and Pickett return to full practice and perform well in Philly, the coaching staff's inclination to stick with an established depth chart will only strengthen. There's also an optics and momentum element that shouldn't be dismissed. Sanders arrived in Cleveland with massive external attention, viral clips, celebrity praise, a high-profile Nike ad, and the highest preseason viewership his game generated in years. That attention is a double-edged sword. It amplifies opportunity, but also raises expectations for rapid advancement. When coaches don't immediately mirror that public momentum by bumping him up the chart, fans cry disrespect. The injury gives the staff a defensible reason to proceed cautiously, but it also frustrates a fan base looking for quick vindication of the draft value gap. So what should Cleveland do next? First, be methodical and transparent in messaging. Confirm the injury, provide a reasonable timeline without overpromising, and emphasize player development. That calms the outside noise and protects Sanders from the set-up-to-fail narrative. Second, manage his rehab aggressively but carefully. Obliques are mechanical, and a gradual throwing progression with monitored reps is the right medical approach. Third, preserve his opportunities. If he can't play in Philadelphia, make sure he's positioned to get extended work in the final preseason game or through controlled joint practice snaps that don't expose him to early season injury risk. Fourth, the team should internally reassess roster flexibility. If they want to keep Sanders on the 53, they may need to be explicit about what they expect to see in the remaining window to justify carrying 4 QBs. For Sanders personally, this is a classic test of temperament as much as of talent. He must demonstrate the same maturity he showed in his post-game comments. Focus on preparation, not the noise. Rehab quickly, be available for meetings and mental reps, and when returned to full health, make the most of every rep. Time isn't entirely lost. The Browns still have training camp practices, the final preseason game, and if rosters allow, the possibility of being kept as a developmental asset. But the margin for error just tightened considerably. Longer term, one preseason game won't define a career. Plenty of late-round quarterbacks have built trajectories by getting smart work and staying healthy. But in the short term, the oblique strain is a practical setback for a rookie who needed a small avalanche of tape to force Cleveland's hand. The Browns' response, medical prudence, a clear path for controlled reps, and a coherent public message will determine whether this becomes a speed bump or a derailment. Shedeur Sanders' momentum hit a sudden snag on Wednesday when the Cleveland Browns announced the rookie quarterback suffered an oblique injury during early practice, forcing him out of the session and putting his availability for Saturday's preseason game against the Philadelphia Eagles in doubt. Sanders, the fifth-round pick who unexpectedly stole the spotlight with a strong showing in Cleveland's preseason opener against Carolina, 14 for 23, 138 yards, 2 TDs, was removed from team activity after the strain occurred during throwing drills, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. Head coach Kevin Stefanski had indicated earlier that Sanders would start Saturday if Dillon Gabriel and Kenny Pickett were unavailable, but the oblique issue immediately undercuts that plan and robs Sanders of precious reps in front of coaches and evaluators. Oblique strains vary in severity. Some players bounce back in days, others miss multiple weeks. Teams typically err on the side of caution with upper body core injuries for quarterbacks, since pain and reduced torso rotation can hamper throwing mechanics and risk worsening the injury. The Browns have labeled Sanders day-to-day, but even a short absence is costly for a rookie who entered camp with limited first-team reps and relied on his preseason performance to force a jump up the depth chart. Context matters here. Cleveland's quarterback room is crowded. Joe Flacco remains the veteran presumed starter, while Kenny Pickett and Dillon Gabriel were both in the mix before injuries shuffled the pecking order. Sanders' preseason debut drew national attention and huge TV numbers, which raised expectations among fans and commentators that he could accelerate his path to a larger role. Now, missing the joint practices and possibly the Eagles game means fewer opportunities to show command of Kevin Stefanski's offense in live competitive settings. From a roster-building angle, the injury complicates evaluations but doesn't necessarily decide Sanders' fate. The Browns still must determine how many quarterbacks to carry into the regular season. Sanders offers cheap, controllable team control over multiple years, which could work in his favor if he demonstrates readiness. But that case is strongest when backed up by consistent practice reps and game tape, both temporarily interrupted by this setback. For Sanders personally, the message is simple: recover cleanly and quickly, then pick up where he left off. For the Browns, the decision now becomes managing his workload, protecting his long-term health, and balancing short-term roster needs. Either way, Wednesday's oblique strain is an unwelcome plot twist in what had been a fast-moving preseason story, one that will be measured not just by highlights, but by how the next 2 weeks unfold.